Nelson Mandela's quiet power. Have you ever wondered how a single man could inspire an entire nation without raising his voice? How someone could endure decades of suffering, yet emerge with forgiveness instead of bitterness? This is the story of Nelson Mandela's quiet power, a lesson not only about leadership, but about the strength that lies in patience, humility, and unshakable hope. In 1964, Nelson Mandela was locked inside the walls of Robben Island, a place designed to crush the human spirit. The days were long, the sun was merciless, and the labor was brutal. Prisoners were forced to break rocks in a limestone quarry until their hands bled. The guards tried to strip them of dignity, giving them short pants instead of trousers, feeding them little more than thin soup, and calling them by numbers instead of names. Yet, Mandela never allowed his spirit to be imprisoned. He walked with dignity. He spoke with calmness. And most importantly, he listened more than he spoke. The other prisoners soon realized something powerful. Mandela's quiet presence carried more strength than the shouts of anger or the cries of despair. Mandela understood that power is not always loud. It does not always come from speeches or weapons. Real power, he believed, comes from discipline, restraint, and vision. When fellow prisoners argued or grew bitter, Mandela listened carefully. Instead of reacting with anger, he would respond with words that soothed and inspired. "Let us not sink into hatred," he would say. "Because if we do, we will become prisoners twice, once in these walls, and once in our own hearts." That is quiet power, the ability to calm storms not by shouting louder, but by bringing peace into the room. The other prisoners began to follow his example. They stood taller. They spoke more respectfully. They carried themselves with dignity, even while wearing prison uniforms. In silence and in patience, Mandela was shaping leaders, right there, behind bars. The world outside knew little of Mandela during those years. News was censored, his image was rarely shown, and many young South Africans had never even seen his face. But his absence only made his presence stronger. His name became a whisper of hope, a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even in chains, a man could remain free inside. And when global campaigns called for his release, it wasn't because they had heard fiery speeches or seen great rallies from him. It was because of what he represented, the courage to endure without losing humanity. The strength to resist without becoming what you fight against. On February 11, 1990, after 27 years behind bars, Nelson Mandela finally walked out of Victor Verster prison. The world held its breath. Would he be filled with anger? Would he call for revenge against those who had stolen half his life? But Mandela walked slowly, with a calm smile on his face, holding the hand of his wife, Winnie. No bitterness. No rage. Only grace. He later said, "As I walked out that door toward freedom, I knew that if I did not leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I would still be in prison." Think about that for a moment. He was free, yet he knew that true freedom was not outside the prison gates. It was inside his own heart. South Africa was a country on the edge of civil war. Decades of apartheid had left deep scars. Black and white communities lived in fear, anger, and mistrust. Mandela had every reason to raise his fist in anger, but instead, he raised his hand for peace. He invited his former enemies, even those who had once called for his death, to sit at the table of negotiation. He reminded his supporters, if you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. This was not weakness. This was quiet power in its highest form. The courage to forgive, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary for the survival of his people. One of the most powerful examples of Mandela's quiet power came in 1995, during the Rugby World Cup in South Africa. At that time, rugby was seen as a white man's sport. For many black South Africans, the green and gold jersey symbolized years of oppression. But Mandela saw an opportunity. He appeared at the final match wearing the Springbok jersey, standing alongside the white rugby captain Francois Pienaar. When the crowd, mostly white, saw this gesture, they erupted into cheers of "Nelson! Nelson! Nelson, in that moment, Mandela turned a game into a bridge. He used symbols instead of speeches, gestures instead of force, to heal a divided nation. So what do we learn from Mandela's story? We learn that true strength is not loud. It does not scream. It does not threaten. True strength listens. It forgives. It endures. It builds bridges where others see walls. Mandela showed us that leadership is not about dominating others, it is about lifting them up. That forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, it is the ultimate proof of courage. And that patience, humility, and calm resolve can change not only one man's destiny, but the destiny of a nation. When Mandela passed away in 2013, the world mourned not just a president or a revolutionary, but a man whose quiet power changed history. His life is a reminder that you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to fight with hatred to defeat injustice. Sometimes, the greatest voice is the calmest one. So remember this: quiet power is not silence. It is strength under control. If Nelson Mandela could endure 27 years in prison, and still walk out with love instead of hate, imagine what you can overcome in your own life. This is the power of patience, the power of forgiveness, the power of hope, the power that never shouts but always wins.